Last week, pro-Khalistan groups attacked and damaged the Indian High Commission in London. India's national flag was pulled down, and the country's diplomatic staff were placed in danger. While key British politicians and officials have condemned the attacks on India's High Commission, the UK's inability to protect New Delhi's diplomatic presence has sparked outrage. To make matters worse, this isn't the first time India's diplomats have faced a threat in the UK. Over the last 50 years, there have been at least 5 instances where India's diplomatic personnel have been put at risk through a failure of British security. We take a deep dive into some snapshots from the past. In 1973, 3 young Pakistanis broke into the Indian High Commission. They were armed with daggers, a sword, acid spray, and replica guns. The 3 young men then took over the High Commission and injured 3 of India's diplomatic staff. Faced with the crisis, India called in London's Metropolitan Police for help. When the 3 Pakistanis refused to answer calls to surrender, the Metropolitan Police opened fire and killed 2 attackers before arresting the 3rd. It turned out that the 2 deceased attackers were 19 and 18 years old respectively, while the one arrested attacker was just 15 years old. They assaulted India's diplomats to protest the continuing detention of Pakistani prisoners of war from the 1971 India-Pakistan War. Despite how young the attackers were, UK Home Secretary Robert Carr defended the decision to fire on them. 2 men lie dead because an armed assault was made on the Indian High Commission. The acid spray was real, the daggers were real, the sword was real, and they were used and injured people. Despite this, the UK made no plans to boost security near the Indian High Commission. Like in 2023, their stance was that the police would arrive immediately if the High Commission staff asked for them. I cannot accept the need for more armed police to be available. What is necessary is that police should be available quickly. Carr even insisted that foreign embassies should try to provide for their own security to deal with threats. However, it was precisely this attitude that allowed a string of attacks in later decades on India's diplomatic presence in Britain. Instead of preventing attacks by providing a standing security presence, British authorities insisted that relief would be sent once Indian diplomats called for it. This effectively boiled down to a purely reactive strategy, where British security would be unable to respond to an unexpected crisis, like the attacks seen last week by pro-Khalistani groups on the Indian High Commission. In 1977, an Indian diplomat named Anwar Singh Ahluwalia was attacked in London. Further, a brick was thrown through the window of the India Tourist Office in the city. Followers of the religious sect Anand Marg, which had been outlawed by Indira Gandhi in India, were thought to be responsible. In response, the High Commission requested that its diplomatic security be increased, and Britain's anti-terrorist squad took over the case. While the Anand Marg sect denied responsibility for the attacks, it was another example of how India's diplomats were in need of better protection, which was simply not provided in the UK. In 1984, India carried out Operation Blue Star, where forces stormed the Golden Temple in Amritsar and killed fundamentalist leader Jarnail Bhindranwale. This led to a string of attacks against Indian diplomatic missions in the UK. India's High Commission in London faced protests by crowds of 15,000 plus Sikhs and other sympathizers. Bhindranwale sympathizers led the crowd and openly stated that their intent was to wage war against India. This time, however, the UK's police were forewarned and showed up to prevent any clashes. In 1985, Indian diplomat Ravinder Madre was murdered by British Kashmiri militants. Madre was second in command of India's consulate in Birmingham. He was kidnapped by militants while out buying a birthday cake for his daughter, and was then held captive for 3 days before being taken to the English city of Leicester. He was then shot 3 times in cold blood. 6 people were charged with offences relating to his death. The British investigations revealed that his killers wanted to attract attention to the cause of Jammu and Kashmir independence. The judge hearing the case said that Madre's killers had no regrets. Their real emotion was one of pride and a sense of achievement. They too would be respected as freedom fighters. One day, the world would respect them. After the abrogation of Article 370 in 2019, India's High Commission in London was attacked repeatedly. Protesters included British Pakistanis and Khalistan sympathizers. Even some members of parliament from the opposition Labour Party led protest marches. Crowds threw eggs, tomatoes, shoes, stones at the Indian High Commission building and even caused damage to the premises. The common thread through each of these 5 incidents is the reaction of the British authorities. Politicians and officials in the United Kingdom have been quick to say the right things and condemn violence against India's diplomatic presence in the country. However, they have not implemented a better security system to prevent these attacks in the first place. As outrage grows over the latest attacks on India's High Commission, it remains to be seen how bilateral ties will be affected.